Some things are worth talking about without fuss and without the usual internet noise. Laziness often looks like a moral defect only from a distance. Up close, it is frequently a mixture of an unmanageable rhythm, scattered attention, too late a start, and the absence of a clear first step. That is why morning becomes not just a time of day, but the point where the day is captured. If you look carefully, it becomes clear that such phenomena cannot be explained by a single reason. Biography, nervous system type, moral choice, and the philosophy of life that a person may not even know how to name in words are always intertwined here. Morning practices are easily turned into a cult of self-punishment. But the point is not to heroically torment yourself at dawn. The point is to build such a first hour that reduces inner friction and returns the will to yourself. Good philosophy never rushes to judgment. It first clarifies exactly what is happening, where the person is protecting themselves, where they are mistaken, where they are growing, and where they are simply beautifully justifying an old wound. It is also useful to remember time. Almost no important trait reveals itself completely in a single episode. It unfolds in repetition, in a long sequence of similar scenes, where a person again and again chooses roughly the same inner position. That is why depth of understanding is always connected with prolonged observation, not with the impression of a bright moment. Hence the main question: what exactly in this phenomenon is strength, and what is protection? Where does the useful skill end and distortion begin? And why do people so often misjudge it? To answer honestly, one must move not along the line of loud effects, but along the line of causes. Only causes show why similar behavior makes one person deeper while leading another further away from themselves. First of all, it is worth noting the following. The first rule is not to surrender the morning to external chaos. If the day begins with other people's messages, feeds, and random stimuli, consciousness immediately loses its own center of gravity. And therefore, this motive cannot be evaluated only by external impression. What looks like a random trait from the outside is often on the inside a way to preserve integrity, avoid disintegration, or regain a sense of proportion. This is visible at work, when formally everything proceeds as usual, but a person again and again runs into the same inner limit. And if this layer is not recognized in time, the person begins to consider natural what in reality has long needed revision. Among the Stoics, this looked like the demand to first return the inner center to oneself, and only then evaluate the external noise. In practical life, this determines a great deal: whom a person trusts, how they distribute attention, what they consider acceptable, how they endure loneliness, tension, uncertainty, and how much chaos they let into their daily life. One of the central points looks like this: the first difficult action should be early. When the most important task is constantly postponed, the psyche carries a background of hidden guilt and resistance throughout the day. Mature understanding begins right here, when we stop automatically admiring or condemning and begin to distinguish the structure of the phenomenon, not just its effect. This is visible in closeness, where a small thing unexpectedly hurts more than it should because it hits an old inner crack. And if this layer is not recognized in time, the person begins to consider natural what in reality has long needed revision. Aristotle would have called this a question of habit, from which character is gradually built, not a one-time impulse. It is precisely in this way that a style of existence gradually takes shape, not from loud declarations, but from repeated micro-decisions that one day become a biography. And if they are not comprehended, they will control life silently. There is a temptation to reduce everything to temperament or upbringing, but this is almost never enough. Between the initial given and the mature form of character, there is always the work of consciousness. A person does not receive everything, but much depends on how they deal with the received material, how they comprehend it, discipline it, soften it, or, on the contrary, bring it to a destructive extreme. One of the central points looks like this. The body needs to be switched on earlier than endless thinking. A small physical action, water, light, a step, breathing. These return the nervous system from viscosity to presence. Mature understanding begins right here, when we stop automatically admiring or condemning and begin to distinguish the structure of the phenomenon, not just its effect. This is visible in the moment of refusal, when outwardly one sentence is pronounced, but inside a question about dignity, guilt, and the right to one's own line is being decided. And if this layer is not recognized in time, the person begins to consider natural what in reality has long needed revision. The Confucian tradition would add a simple thought. The external form of an action over time educates the inner form of a person. It is precisely in this way that a style of existence gradually takes shape, not from loud declarations, but from repeated micro-decisions that one day become a biography. And if they are not comprehended, they will control life silently. If we remove all unnecessary words, an important observation remains. The ritual must be simple and repeatable. A system that is too complex collapses from the first fatigue. What is more reliable is what can be performed even on a bad day. At the same time, one cannot forget the other side. The human psyche rarely acts from one pure cause. Where there is strength, protection is often also present. Where there is choice, fatigue or not fully lived pain may stand nearby. This is visible in the evening at home, when no drama has occurred, but a whole layer of tension has already accumulated in the body that is difficult to put into words. And if this layer is not recognized in time, the person begins to consider natural what in reality has long needed revision. Viktor Frankl later expressed a similar idea differently. Between stimulus and reaction, there remains a small space of freedom, and it is there that human quality is decided. It is precisely in this way that a style of existence gradually takes shape, not from loud declarations, but from repeated micro-decisions that one day become a biography. And if they are not comprehended, they will control life silently. In the middle of this conversation, it is useful to make a short inner pause. Recall a similar situation from your own life or from the life of a loved one. If you recognize this pattern of behavior, write one honest line in the comments about where exactly you saw it. Very often, someone else's example helps to see your own blind spot more accurately. Hence the ethical question. A psychological feature becomes truly important not when it makes a person unusual, but when it influences the quality of their actions. How honest they are, how reliable, how capable they are of not causing unnecessary pain to themselves and others in order to preserve their own comfortable construction. This is where maturity is measured. First of all, it is worth noting the following. Rigidity without mercy gives a short effect. If the morning order turns into a form of self-hatred, then the system, sooner or later, begins to be associated with punishment. Mature understanding begins right here, when we stop automatically admiring or condemning and begin to distinguish the structure of the phenomenon, not just its effect. This is visible in a new acquaintance, where a person seems open, but in reality is talking not only with the interlocutor, but also with their own history. And if this layer is not recognized in time, the person begins to consider natural what in reality has long needed revision. Lao Tzu would remind us that excessive tension often weakens precisely where a person wants to look strong. It is precisely in this way that a style of existence gradually takes shape, not from loud declarations, but from repeated micro-decisions that one day become a biography. And if they are not comprehended, they will control life silently. One of the central points looks like this. Mourning shapes self-attitude. A person quickly begins to believe not in promises about themselves, but in how they enter the day again and again. And therefore this motive cannot be evaluated only by external impression. What looks like a random trait from the outside is often, on the inside, a way to preserve integrity, avoid disintegration, or regain a sense of proportion. This is visible in conflict, where one side fights for meaning, while the other has long been fighting only to save face. And if this layer is not recognized in time, the person begins to consider natural what in reality has long needed revision. Jung would say that unrecognized inner dynamics will still manifest, only already in the form of a symptom, irritation, or a repeating scenario. It is precisely in this way that a style of existence gradually takes shape. Not from loud declarations, but from repeated micro-decisions that one day become a biography. And if they are not comprehended, they will control life silently. One of the central points looks like this. A strong morning does not guarantee an ideal day, but it gives a sense of support. And it is support, not inspiration, that most often defeats chronic inertia. And therefore, this motive cannot be evaluated only by external impression. What looks like a random trait from the outside is often, on the inside, a way to preserve integrity, avoid disintegration, or regain a sense of proportion. This is visible in correspondence, where one extra pause suddenly becomes overgrown with fantasies, fear, and wrong conclusions. And if this layer is not recognized in time, the person begins to consider natural what in reality has long needed revision. Machiavelli, even from a different optic, would evaluate first of all the practical result. What strength, vulnerability, or reputation such a way of living produces. It is precisely in this way that a style of existence gradually takes shape. Not from loud declarations, but from repeated micro-decisions that one day become a biography. And if they are not comprehended, they will control life silently. Therefore, one cannot turn a psychological mechanism into an idol. Any trait becomes valuable only when it maintains connection with reality, compassion, and the ability to revise oneself, and not only to protect. Mature self-understanding always slightly frees one from theatre. It makes a person less dependent on image and a little more dependent on truth. And truth is rarely brilliant. It is more often working, sober, and sometimes unpleasant. But it is precisely from such truth that inner resilience is assembled. Therefore, real self-understanding never reduces to self-description. It is not enough to recognize a trait in oneself. It is also important to understand how it works in different periods, when it helps, when it distorts choice, and what price it demands from closeness, work, and dignity. Only such work makes knowledge about oneself not a beautiful portrait, but a tool of inner freedom. None of these topics exists outside the body and everyday life. The way a person sleeps, eats, keeps their word, answers messages, experiences a pause, enters conflict, and recovers after tension says no less about them than any confessional monologues. Philosophy without everyday form quickly turns into decoration, and psychology without observation of life turns into beautiful fog. Separately, it is worth saying about self-deception. Self-deception is almost always smarter than we would like to think. It willingly uses noble words to hide fear, fatigue, envy, the need for confirmation, or unwillingness to grow up. Therefore, a person has to return again and again to the question, do I really understand myself, or am I simply protecting the familiar version of myself from an unpleasant truth? With social perception, something similar happens. People may not know psychological terms, may not read philosophers, and may not think about character conceptually at all. But they feel very subtly what kind of way of inner organization stands before them. Someone brings clarity into the space. Someone brings fuss. Someone brings hidden dependence on approval. And someone brings a rare form of calm composure. And therefore, real change here always looks more boring than imagination dreams. It rarely begins with a great insight. More often, it begins with one honestly seen mechanism, with one refusal of self-justification, with one new measure in speech, choice, or daily rhythm. But it is precisely such small shifts that change the trajectory over a long distance. That is why what is important is not the romance of character, but the precision of attitude toward it. The same qualities can elevate a person if they have measure, and destroy them if they turn into a cult of their own rightness, or a way not to face reality. In serious psychology and serious philosophy, the logic of simple heroes and simple villains almost never works. The logic of structure, consequences, and inner honesty works. In the end, the question is not to find an ideal psychological type. The question is to notice which way of living makes you more precise, more honest, and more resilient. It is especially important to understand this if the topic of morning rules that help overcome inertia and laziness somehow concerns your own life as well. Everything else is decorations that will sooner or later crumble.